am, and I've actually been. I'm exclaustrated from the Fraternity of St. Peter. So even though I am still incarnated, I'm actually part of the public association of the Society of the Most Sorrowful Mother, which is the society of priests that we're founding.
Oh,
So
nice. Awesome.
yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So, and Father Ripperger is an exorcist, and he's actually one. I know a couple of exorcists, and it seems they all check with you about what to do with that. But he's one of the leading exorcists in the country. You want to say something about that, Father?
Yeah, it's a total case of in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So if you know just a little bit about this, everybody tends to ask you about it. So
Yeah. So, and you guys are busy. I know that. I know the exorcists that I know are very, very busy. Lots going on in the world right now, and that's what we want to talk about tonight. When we asked to have you on, Father, we conceived what we would talk about tonight, and we really wanted to get at, what is going on in the world right now. What is it that's really stirring up so much evil in the world right now? I know that we wanted to talk about, how are demons getting in, and what about grace? What about that supernatural grace? How do we ward off those demons? So maybe you could tell us. I've heard exorcists talk about portals.
right.
You can have portals of grace. You can have portals to demons. But
Right.
there seems like there's a lot of portals open up to demonic activity. You want to speak to that, Father?
Yeah, a portal is just an entryway. It's a way in which you enter into something in some fashion. And so when you're talking about portals of grace, you're actually talking about the means by which grace enters into the world. And the principal ways that those come is through the sacraments. The church has always said that the
Right.
sacraments are the primary means of ordinary grace for those of us after Christ. And so it's what, people who go to confession on a regular basis, people who receive
Right.
the Eucharist on a regular basis, they've got all their sacraments. This is one of the principal ways by which they grow in grace. Then, of course, there's the sacramentals of the church. Those are also, and there's different sacramentals. There's the Benedictine holy water. We can get into a little bit of those if you like.
Sure.
And then, of course, there's the private prayer of the individual and the individual's own devotions and things he does like that, which are also means of grace. But I can't stress enough that even in our own work, primarily when people come to us, one of the first things we have to do is get them back on a normal sacramental life, going to confession,
Right.
going to mass, and just doing a basic elementary regimen of prayer. And a lot of times that clears out most of what we deal with. In fact,
Sure.
when people contact us, they don't see me too often. It's only the people that it becomes clear it's possession. And most of the people that are at the lower levels, most of that just gets cleaned up on its own, just by leading a normal Catholic life.
And that's something.
So, Father, if I can chime in for a second on this. So just to be very clear for the people out there, it is incredibly necessary that we have a regular, consistent prayer life and a regular, consistent sacramental life. And that alone is, you're saying, if I get this correct, it sounds right, is some of our best means to combat evil. Just prayer life and sacramental life. Those are the key root foundational points. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And actually, the number of people that actually come or show up on your doorstep that actually need the help, a vast majority of them are not doing those things. It's very, very rare that you come across somebody who might have some type of extraordinary diabolic influence and yet they're still leading a normal sacramental life. A lot of that's just because the demons will drive them away from it. But a lot of it is just the lack of leading a Catholic life can be an open door, especially for Catholics who know better that they should be getting to Mass on Sundays and holy days of obligation, or that the types of sin that they're committing is grave matter. They know that, and so a lot of times those are the reasons for it. But if they would just lead a normal Catholic life, that is a standard prayer, a prayer life like saying the Rosary every day and doing meditation or things of that sort, auxilium Christianorum, which we talked about at some point before. But it's also but then the sacraments, primarily receiving the sacraments on a regular basis. The number of people that come to us asking for help, especially when it involves their children, where their children are suffering from difficulties, a vast majority of the time, it's because of the fact that the parents are either leading a life of sin, the father's involved in pornography, or their marriages are not properly, they're not valid marriages. And so they're living in an irregular situation, and they wonder why their children are being attacked. So if they just get, a lot of times, just getting the marriage straightened out, getting the family on a normal prayer life, getting them back to the sacraments, that solves a vast majority of the problems in those cases.
Wow. I've heard it said, and maybe it was you that said it. I might have seen it in a video, but exorcists claim that a good confession is one of the most strongest ways to rid oneself of any demons, oppressions, and things like that. That's true, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Part of it has to do with the nature of the legality of it. So when we commit a sin, we are, in a certain sense, taking ourselves out from underneath God's authority and placing ourselves under the authority of Satan. But also,
Right.
by committing the sin, we are also aligning or allegiing ourselves with him. And there's a certain binding that we're doing. When we commit a sin, we bind ourselves to the agent of sin, which is Satan, to his kingdom. And through that, and so whereas the absolution actually, it absolves, it literally removes the bond of the sin in relationship to the individual and the demon who is got his foot in the door through the sin. Once that bond is broken, a lot of times that'll even cause cases of possession to break, a lot of obsession, but oppression, you see that quite a bit. Once people finally confess the sins and things like that, a lot of that stuff just clears up.
Father, I can tell you that early in my priesthood, confession wasn't a big deal among most priests. And
Right.
I remember, doing the typical offering it, a half hour before mass on Saturday or something like that. But I've been convicted, thank God, it was several years ago, 15, 20 years ago, that it's absolutely essential. In fact, I feel it's so essential that I made as much accessibility as I could by building confessional in the front entryway of my rectory. And so people will come
Right.
and, yeah. In fact, you might have heard a little bleep just now. That was someone texting me to ask if I was going to be available for confession tomorrow. But I don't know about you, Father, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as a shepherd of these sheep, I literally panic when I feel like people aren't in that state of grace. Why? Because they're just fodder for the devil. They're just easily manipulated. And so I tell people, when you get in that state of grace, that's when the words that Jesus says, he says, "My yoke is easy, my burden light." What do you mean by that? And this is my interpretation, is that, when you're in that state of grace, you when you doing the right thing and stopping from doing the wrong thing, you just use the words, of course I should do this, or of course I should do that. It becomes easy. But when we're not in that state of grace, it's like climbing Mount Everest to pick up a rosary, right?
It very much is. Actually, there's, one of the things that demons can do is they can actually move our emotions and put thoughts in our minds and actually block people from receiving the sacraments. The first time I noticed this, it was an exorcist who was training me, said, if you find that people in your parish, that there's, you're sitting in the confessional and people aren't actually coming to confession, one of the best things that you can do is say a binding prayer or do a minor exorcism over the people in your church or in your parish against any demon that's keeping them from coming to confession. I've taught other priests this, and everybody's experience is the same. Within a minute or two, someone's in the confessional saying, "Father, I wasn't going to come to confession, but," and it shows you that they can actually block people from receiving the sacraments. Conversely, obviously, that tells you they don't want people receiving the sacraments, because once they do, then they have a certain strength in relationship to the spiritual warfare, which they don't want people to have.
Exactly.
Now, Father,
you could say that. Go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Father, when it comes to us laymen, us lowly laymen who are just kind of hanging out here trying to engage the battle for our families, but when it comes to this, you talk about points of entry or portals of entry for the demonic. How critical is it? I mean, as a spiritual head of my home, even though my kids are all out of the home now, I still pray. I have the authority to pray binding prayers over my children and my wife. Still, do I not? Number one.
Yes, you do. You
okay.
do.
All right. So
by virtue of the fourth commandment primarily, but it has to do with the natural law, because they, as their father, up until they reach the age of majority, you actually have the right to to command your children, but you also therefore have the right to command the demons in relationship to it afterwards. Because of the nature of the fourth commandments, children are still bound to do the bidding of their parents unless there's sufficient reason to the contrary. That, we have noticed, gives the parents the ability to do binding prayers in relationship to their children. And one of the things that we always watch for is to make sure that people are following the proper authority structure, is if there's any retaliation. So what we've noticed is that parents are rarely retaliated against when they say the binding prayers for their children.
When you say retaliated against, you mean by the demons, or in some natural way? Or
Yes, that's right. So the demons will attack the person very often in the same way they're attacking the child, but they'll attack the parents. Sometimes they'll attack the parents' weaknesses and things of that sort. But we've found that doesn't happen except for in very rare cases. But generally speaking, the demons know they must obey the authority structure. See, what most people don't realize is that the demons actually have a natural law as well. And St. Thomas parses out the three categories of natural inclination. But in the third category of natural inclination, which is proper to reason in human beings, but in demons it's proper to, and angels, it's proper to their intellect. And in there, God built into them a structure, just like he did to us, to grasp the binding force of the command of a superior. And so as a result, even in cases of possession, when you're commanding the demons in session, when they hear that and they see that intellectually, that's what drives them and compels them to actually do. And so their will is at variance with that, but eventually they will succumb to what they know is the truth. And so it's the same thing here, is they know that the parents have a right to command the demons not to influence the children.
So then would it be,
go ahead.
Forgive me, Father, I just wanted to finish up with this question then. This is amazing. So to give us husbands and fathers a lot of hope, because in a lot of my work with men out there, men's conferences, parish missions, and so forth, a lot of men will come up and say, well, my kids have grown, they've moved on. I wasn't this way. I'm having a conversion. It's too late for me now. And I will normally tell them it's not too late, because you still have a spiritual authority in this. Is this
That's
accurate?
correct.
Father? That is
Yes,
right.
that's very correct. And they also have to realize too, at this point, it's true that sometimes it feels like I have the same people or the same kinds of observations made by people that, well, my children are out, why would I do? It's a little bit too late. And actually, no, you still have obligations to your children morally because of the obligations of charity. And so you still have an obligation to say those prayers for your children. You would also have the obligations of counsel, giving your children counsel at times in which they're properly open to it, etc. But that also means that you also have the rights to the spiritual authority over them. And so the demons recognize that. And so it's not too late, and they should continue to pray for their children. And if they haven't, then they must begin praying for them.
And is this the same for mothers as well? They don't have authority over their husbands, but do the mothers have authority over their children along with the father?
Yes, they do, and basically the same reasons. Right now, I'm writing a book on the nature of diabolic influence. It's a little bit out of hand. It's 650 pages. I haven't even gotten to the chapter on possession yet, and it's 22 chapters, and I'm only on chapter 9. So, anyway, the point being is, in there,
what's the cliff notes,
I lay
Father?
out in chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm going to put out a lay version, I'm hoping, at some point. But in there, in chapter 4, the whole chapter is dedicated to just the authority structure. And in there, I parse out exactly where parents have the authority and where they don't. And it's very detailed, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about that today, even among exorcists.
Wow.
So,
people are listening right now, Father, and I think they're leaning forward because, they have a spouse or they have a children or child that has wandered away from the faith. And what you're saying here, if they only get back into that simple routine of going to church on days of obligation, and then go regularly to confession, usually that's about once a month. And I would think you would say, have a close relationship with the Blessed Mother, pray the Rosary as often as you can. That alone will turn their faith back toward God, right?
Yes, that's actually true. I think that, and one of the things I often tell parents to do is look at the behavior of your child. I mean, we talked about the portals to demons. Well, the principal portals to demons is mortal sin. Though the mortal sins are the primary things that open up the door. Venial sins don't open up the doors of the diabolic. Now, the demons use them to slowly lead us to mortal sin, but in point
Right.
and fact, it's mortal sin that is the open door. What most people don't realize is that every time you commit a mortal sin, technically speaking, you've placed yourself under the authority of Satan, and so to become possessed is actually a proper effect of mortal sin. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody commits mortal sin becomes possessed. But the point being is, and because God is merciful, God, you've opened the door through mortal sin, but God determines which demons are allowed to step across the threshold. And so we can thank God for his mercy in that respect. But this is one of the things, is to start praying, start saying binding prayers against the particular behavior, like the spirit of pornography or the spirit of impurity or the spirit of rebellion or whatever the case is. When they see that, if they start praying against that in relationship to their children, and then at the same time ask Our Lady to give the person the grace to come back to the sacraments. Another thing that I'll often recommend that people do, and I first started doing it in relationship to children, to their parents who are dying. I'll tell them, look, it's not just enough that you pray that they receive the grace, because the demons can mess with people psychologically. And so even if they're getting the graces, the actual graces, the demons can thwart that process and get the person to end up not being faithful to the grace by affecting the person emotionally or psychologically. So what you need to do is, one of the things I'll tell them is, bind any demon that's keeping the person from going to confession, or any demon that's keeping the person from receiving the sacraments or for coming back into the church. So if you bind that first, as well as saying the prayers and asking Our Lady for the graces for the individual, a lot of times doing that negative part and the positive part will actually result in their conversion. So this is something which parents can do in relationship with their children. When they see that the children aren't leading the Catholic faith, start saying prayers to bind the demons, against any demon that would keep them, or against the demons that would keep them from coming back into the faith or being open to hear about the faith as well, because they can even affect people's thinking. We call it running commentary, especially with people who are possessed. It doesn't matter what you say to them; they'll hear what you say, but they think something different because of what the demon is putting in their head. And the same thing, I'm sure parents will often say they experience the same thing in a relationship with their children when they talk about the faith. But if they do those things, a lot of times that will slowly but surely open up the child to being receptive to hearing more about the faith, or even going to confession.
Wow. So, Father, this is unbelievably fascinating. We're going to take a break, but when we get back, we're going to ask if you can kind of get real concrete. What are the ways in which we can fortify ourselves? What is the church what has the church given to us? And also, what about our homes? How can we fortify those? So we'll talk about that when we come back.
We're back, everyone. U.S. Grace Force Podcast. Father Richard Heilman, myself, Doug Barry, with our guest tonight, Father Chad Ripperger, exorcist, and just very wise individual. We're really happy that he's on the show with us tonight. Father Ripperger, just again to kind of follow up on the last segment, to be very, very clear for all of us, especially husbands, fathers, mothers, wives, but even priests and anybody who's a leader or in charge, has a spiritual authority that's been given to them. When we are not fulfilling that role, when I'm, for example, not the spiritual head of my home that I'm supposed to be, does that then create a point of entry or a portal of entry for the diabolical by me not standing on the wall and protecting as I should be protecting? Is that accurate? Yes or no?
Yes, it actually is. If you look at the first thing that Satan did with Eve, is to get her to make the choice on her own to step out from out the authority of the husband. So his attack is always on the authority structure in some fashion. This is why masculinity, which we can talk about maybe a little bit later, but masculinity is under such severe attack. But it's also the same thing and then what did Adam do? When he took the fruit from Eve, he capitulated his authority. So that's the undermining of the authority structure was one of the first things that Satan was actually looking for. If the two principal functions of an authority is to provide and to protect. So if the father is not protecting the family spiritually, not just physically and morally, but spiritually by doing the prayers and saying those things and keeping watch over the home, etc. And if the wife doesn't submit to that in a rightly ordered way to that authority, then what happens is that it becomes the segue for the demons to affect the children, because the authority structure has been affected. And so those who are supposed to be protected by the authority structure, namely the wife and the children, are not being protected. So
Wow.
this is one of the principal reasons why in our line of work, one of the things that we'll do is we actually ask them in our intake form to find out exactly what is the family structure really like, because if there's serious disorder, that's got to get straightened out, because if it doesn't, a lot of times you're not going to clean up the problem. So yes,
Right.
if the father doesn't maintain his authority within the home according to the mind of Christ, obviously treating his bride, it's his family and his wife like the bride of Christ, etc., as Christ talks about in Ephesians, if he doesn't do that, then the children become actually susceptible. Conversely is also the case. If he is engaging in sin, he's actually in mortal sin. He's inviting the demons into the home. And this is one of the reasons why you'll even see this, where the father will be committing, usually it's pornography. That's the thing we run up against the most in relationship with the father and the son. The father will begin using pornography, and then the next thing you know, the child, who is not even being exposed to pornography, starts being barraged with impure thoughts and stuff, and he doesn't even know where it's coming from, and he's perplexed by it. So the point being is the father is in a certain sense the gateway, but he's, because he determines who comes in and who doesn't in relationship to the home, spiritually speaking. But then in addition to keeping the demons out, it's also his place to invite all the angels and the saints in. And so this is one of the reasons why it's the father's place, not the mother's, even though the mother can aid the father in doing it. It's the father's primary obligation to make sure that the prayer life within the family is done properly. It's the father's place to make sure that the children are saying their prayers. And the children need to see the father saying his prayers so that they recognize this is part of justice in relationship to God that any real man would render or do. And also it teaches the girls, this is the type of man that I want to marry. That is the man who's going to be just to God, and therefore he's going to be just to me. So this is, these are the things. So the father is one of the key pivotal things. But this is obviously the reason why the masculinity, especially of fatherhood, is under so much attack. You see it all the time in the news media. You just watch any kind of, even just commercials or something, it's always the wife or the children who are the wise ones, and the father's just this idiot and adult who can't
Homer Simpson.
function, do anything properly. Yeah, exactly. So it's the inversion of what actually should be, but it's ultimately just a tearing down of the masculinity and of the fatherhood. But without going too far afield, that's the main reason why the father has to maintain these things, and he himself has to be disciplined, doing his prayers, especially for the protection and for the providence spiritually of the children and the wife.
Yeah, I believe this is the year of Saint Joseph. I've heard a rumor that it's actually going to come next year, but this is the 150th anniversary of Saint Joseph being named the patron of the church. And we also see that Father Calloway's book is coming out, Consecration to Saint Joseph. So everything seems to be going there. And so we actually set this up tonight, didn't we, Father, that we wanted to talk about, men's role and what's happening to men and how can they become stronger. And we're actually going to unpack this even more in our third segment. But before we do that, I want to hit, I think a lot of people, okay, we have an exorcist, a very knowledgeable exorcist here. And you're talking about portals of demons and all this stuff. What can we do? What are the tools, or I like to say the weapons that the church has handed down to us that can help us to fortify ourselves, but also if we can talk about fortifying our homes.
Yeah, I mean, in military terms, they refer to it as hardening the target, or in a self-defense. I do a lot of self-defense talks, and it's how do you protect yourself? Situational awareness, your head's on a swivel, and you're hardening the target so you become less of the victim. So how do we harden the target, Father, spiritually speaking, for our homes and our lives?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of levels. The first is it's like any other type of military situation too. You're not going to have a decent military without discipline. And that applies even with ourselves internally. You have to have a certain amount of discipline. And what does that mean concretely in the home? It means that the father needs to be encouraging the children to lead a moral life, to do all those things that are proper to a Catholic life, to engage in the various devotions. The father needs to, and the mother needs to, make sure that a consistent prayer life is being done within the home so that right order is actually followed. So in other words, there needs to be an interior discipline in the family, and that has to come ultimately through the father's authority. He can't be overbearing, he can't be difficult, but at the same time, he has to be firm, and yet at the same time, honestly seeking the good of the children, etc. And he can't be seeking his own good because that's contrary to the nature of authority. So his own discipline and the discipline within the family and maintaining that will go a long way. The second, and a part of that, of course, is, as we mentioned before, making sure everybody in the family is leading a Catholic, a sacramental life. The second thing is just making use of various sacramentals and devotions. So having Benedict medals in the four corners of the property, make sure the Benedict medals are blessed in the old rite because they actually have the exorcism that's attached to them. So putting them in the four corners of the property. Sometimes people will put them over their doorstops, and sometimes even over the windows, but I don't think that's so much necessary, although it's to be encouraged if people want to do it. Making use of holy water, the father from time to time blessing and sprinkling the house with holy water, having it blessed every Epiphany by the priest. You want to make sure that the priest comes and does the Epiphany blessing when you move into a new home. As a general recommendation, as a general rule, I always exercise the place because you never know, even if it's a new house, what the construction people have done. I have a relative who moved into a brand new house, and the people in the construction had done stuff there, and so we're still cleaning up that house spiritually.
Wow.
So exercising it and then having the priest bless it when you first move in. Also doing the various devotions. One of the principal ways to harden the target is to get into the habit of being under the mantle of Our Lady.
Yes.
She is, without a doubt, she has perfect coercive power over demons. So, and you see this even in session. When she shows up, it's over. There's not even any discussion. The demons don't even talk very much. I mean, they might scream and yell and carry on, of course. But the point being is that having a strong devotion to Our Lady and encouraging that within the family is one of the key ways to protect the family. St. Michael, obviously, having a devotion to St. Michael. There should be a devotion to St. Joseph because he is, after all, a hammer of demons as well. And it's also, and he's also one of the most powerful in relationship to demons. Having a devotion to him, if for no other reason than to asking him for the grace to, to become a good father and a good husband and things of that sort. So I think a lot of it is just a matter of using the various devotions, getting the children to develop devotions to the saints that they might have a natural inclination or a disposition towards. And then, of course, using exorcised oil, if you can find a priest that will actually do it for you, having blessed handles so that the demons of the air are driven out. These are all different ways, which I've talked about in various conferences, but these are all different ways that you can actually fortify the situation at home so that the children are protected and the wife is protected, and even the husband in a certain sense, because even when he exercises his own authority, God honors that and protects him in that process. Whereas if he's not exercising his proper authority, God's not going to necessarily protect him, usually because he's getting involved in stuff that he shouldn't.
Okay, you just opened up a number of questions for me. I'm just going to try to hit these. Number one, when it comes to the blessing as well, I was told years ago by a priest, he said, make sure that you're blessing your wife and your children every day with holy water. So from that moment, it's been 27 years or so since I was told that. I bless my wife and my kids almost every time I'm in there, almost every day I'm in their presence with holy water. Is number one, is that something we husbands should be doing, fathers and husbands?
Yes, absolutely. They should be doing it on a regular basis, usually before the children go to bed each night and before the husband and the wife go to bed each night.
Okay.
I actually at Easter time in the old rite, they bless the water by adding chrism to it, chrism oil.
Nice.
And I actually save all that because I put it in bottles and I give it to families so that because the parents always love that new chrism smell of their newborn baby, and it's powerful water that I use, and I ask them, bless your children and bless each other with this water.
So, and then follow up on that question too. I like what you said about if you can find a priest who will do it. Well, Father Heilman, you're one of those priests, so get ready to start getting that blessed oil out to people. But then, Father Ripperger, another question. Just to reiterate, you mentioned about blessed candles, burning blessed candles throughout the day, so that because that actually affects the demons in the air. That's correct then?
That's right.
Oh, that's
Yeah, that's right. Actually, if you look in scripture, there's actually, if I remember right, I can't remember how many. It's like in the 20s. There's like 20 references to demons of the air throughout the totality of scripture in various locations. I might be wrong in that statistic, but there's definitely references to them. And basically what they are is that the demons that can they get into the air through various sins that people commit, etc., but they can influence things within our home. And so the candle, as it's blessed in the old rite, is actually asks, and prayer begets what it signifies. So what you ask for is what you get. So when you pray this in relationship with the candle, and the priest does, and it receives that blessing, it's actually you're asking to drive the demons out of the area by the light of the candle.
wow.
So it's actually it actually have a potent effect. Sometimes people will notice this. I can't quite put my finger on whether it's a natural thing, but I think there's a spiritual component to it as well. And that is, when you walk into a like a crypt or something where there's candles burning everywhere, right? And they're exorcised and blessed candles, and you're there to pray. There's almost there's an ambiance or an aura that you actually have in relationship to this. The last time I noticed it is when I went to the Our Lady Shrine there in Wisconsin. And that's one of the places that I actually noticed it. But if you burn the candles on a regular basis, and sometimes people can't because they have young children or cats or what have you, but if you can burn the candles, that will help significantly.
But you say they should be blessed in the old rite. Is that correct? Is that best?
Yes, because the new rite of blessing doesn't actually contain the same formula. And so again, because what you get is what you ask, what you ask for is what you get. And Christ himself says it, knock and it will be opened, ask and you shall receive. So there's a specific correspondence to what you ask for is what you get. And the same thing is in relationship to prayer. So when these things are in the prayers that the priest is saying in relationship to the particular sacramentals, that's the actual effect that it ends up having, even in spiritual warfare.
Okay.
Well, Father, this is unbelievably fascinating, and I know super helpful for everybody that's listening and giving us all kinds of concrete facts. We alluded to it earlier in this podcast, the assault on men or masculinity in our times. And like I said, we're in this year of, I believe, St. Joseph heading up. And so when we come back, could we get into, what is going on? What is this attack all about? And what can we do to help ourselves and each other to become, what I like to say, St. Joseph strong? So we'll talk about that when we come back.
We're back, everybody. U.S. Grace Force Podcast, third segment, and we're going to get right into it. This is important. This is, it's off the charts. A problem is where men are not where they need to be. If that made any sense. We're not where we need to be.
Right.
Father Ripperger, there's this massive attack against masculinity. We know there was this massive feminist movement that came in the 60s and 70s. It seemed to rise up.
Right.
And men, a lot of times, have just, as you mentioned earlier, we've capitulated. We've laid down on the battlefield. We're getting kicked, run over. We're walking away from it. We're AWOL, whatever term we want to use. A lot of men just are not where they need to be. Can you break down a bit what's going on with this attack from the diabolical perspective and what you see and hear from the demons themselves, even about men, their role, and what's going on here?
Well, many of the theologians, and I think even some of the fathers of the church, make the observation that one of the reasons that Satan went after Eve is because he knew if he could undo Eve, he could take out Adam, because that's what his real goal was. He knew that Adam was the key, that the inheritance of grace and the preternatural gifts wouldn't be passed to subsequent generations if he could take Adam out. And so he knows that Adam is the key to all of it. A large part of what we're dealing with in the feminist movement in this country, there's a couple of thoughts that I think might be helpful. Ironically, when I was in Rome, I first realized this when I was in Rome, although they've capitulated too and they're suffering their problems there now too. I was just there, but when I was there in the mid 90s, they would say things like, why is it that the Americans can't control their women? Now, we're not talking necessarily about control their women, but basically what their observation is that the reason the feminist movement got off the ground is because men weren't being men. If men would have told the women, we're not tolerating this, we're not going to listen to this nonsense, and we didn't give them a voice, promote this stuff, it wouldn't have been a problem. Obviously, as you know, the current feminist movement actually has its origins in communism. It was actually, ironically, part of the whole thing when Our Lady said Russia will spread its errors. The Vladimir Lenin actually did an interview with Clara Zetkin, and he himself was always out to destroy and tear down masculinity. But the principal way they do it is by playing to the original sin, that is, the effects of original sin in women. When Eve ate the fruit, she was seeking self-sufficiency. She wanted to act out on her own. She wanted to be able to do these things independently of her husband, and etc. Now women are stuck with that because the punishment fits the crime. And so that they're driving that primarily by pushing women to seek these things independently of their husband, which is not what they're designed or what God had intended by the natural law. This has then also the feminist movement, which is, again, part of Russia spreading its errors in a certain sense. Not that Russia is necessarily over here funding the particular feminist movement, but it comes from the whole communist, Marxist, Leninist mindset. Where women are a part of the workforce and things like that, instead of their primary joy, ironically, which they should have, was at home. But what happens is when they push women out into the workforce, it's an automatic attack against masculinity's ability to provide or to be the primary provider for their family. The women want to be independent and self-sufficient, which is an attack on the man's ability to protect. So there's an attack on to provide and to protect in relationship to this. That's what the demons go after. There's three reasons why demons actually go after men. The first is that the first and primary one is that they're in the image of God the Father, and they have an absolute hatred of anything that has his image whatsoever. It's also the reason they go after women, because they're in the image of Our Lady. But they go after the Father because he's in the image of God the Father. The second reason they go after it is because he is the locus of the authority structure. They know if they can take that out, it's like any other form of spiritual warfare. You have to take out where the authority structures or where the power is, or where the heads of the military are, the headquarters and things like that. You take that out, and everything else is going to be in disarray. You know that. So they know if they attack the Father, and if they attack his authority, especially by getting the wife to chafe against him and not be willing to submit in the mind of Saint Paul, etc. If he can get them to do that, the husbands will very often capitulate, because that's one of the things we got stuck with Adam and Eve as men, is that we don't want to be responsible. Because what did he do? Instead of when God came, and instead of being responsible and saying, Eve, you're on your own after she ate the fruit, and also when God showed up and said, why'd you do this? He threw Eve under the bus. He didn't even take responsibility for it. So the point being is that now men are stuck with that, and so guys will capitulate very rapidly. So there's an attack because they want to take out the authority structure, because then everything else will be in disarray. And that's because the third reason they want to take the husbands out or the fathers out and masculinity out is because it's not just to protect the family, it's also to protect the culture. But it also means that it's to protect the children. The children, once the father is taken out of, once he is essentially emasculated, then the children are easy prey, and that's why they do it. So these are the three reasons that they actually do it, and they're very effective. They know exactly how to do it. They know what the proclivities are of men, and because of original sin, they know we won't be responsible. We also know that men today don't want to suffer, because our life is so comfortable today. It's a problem, and as a result of that, men get to the point where if it's uncomfortable or inconvenient, they get annoyed and tore up. And that comfort results in them not willing to suffer, because that was the other thing that God told them they had to do. They had to, because he actually told Adam, he said, you will work by the fruit of your brow. In other words, you're going to have to take responsibility and provide for her now that you've done this. The second thing is in thorns and by the sweat of your brow and in thorns. So it's going to be painful. And so there has to be a suffering element in any kind of growth in masculinity. And so those things have been essentially removed. This is one of the reasons why they drive things like getting men to spend, or boys particularly in their teenage years, spending large amounts of time playing video games and things of this sort. It's to undermine their growth in self-denial and get them habituated to desiring pleasure. As St. Thomas says, pleasure is, he said, the definition of effeminacy is an unwillingness to be detached from one's pleasure in order to pursue what is arduous. That's his definition, which once you start reflecting on it is totally true. These guys, he gets them mired down in constantly seeking a life of pleasure so that it undermines their growth in masculinity. And even when they engage things that are difficult, they chaff and they're whining about it all the time rather than engaging it. Because a real man, well, if they know that there's a good to come from this suffering and the good can come from this pain and the arduousness and the difficulty of this task, they will engage it with vigor, and they get a certain fulfillment out of that, because we were designed as men to get a fulfillment from that. This is why guys who are effeminate, interiorly, there's always this kind of self-loathing they suffer from, and the demons play on that even. So this is part of the attack that the demons have mounted, and it's on every single level in our culture. It's even in the church. They've emasculated the priests. They've done all sorts of things. They're willing to throw them under the bus at any opportunity, etc. There's all sorts of things. The lay people will very often attack the clergy. So there's not a recognition that he's a spiritual father, but in the context of the family primarily, that's how he's been attacking the family, the masculinity, so that it can't be a true father. It can't be a true authority. It can't be a true authority. It can't provide and protect for the children.
You know, Father, this week, I think thousands, probably tens of thousands. I don't know why it caught on this year like it has, but the men are engaging in what's called Exodus 90, and it's taking 90 days out, but it's actually calling them to do exactly what you're talking about, to take on a challenge.
That's right.
Stuff like cold showers. I had my cold showers this week. It's probably the hardest thing I have to do of all of it. But anyways, but it does, you know. I've been a Packer fan all my life, and Vince Lombardi, the head coach of the Packers back in the '60s, he'll always be a hero to me. And I love this quote. I want to share it with you by Vince Lombardi. He said, and it speaks to exactly what you just got done saying. He said, "And in truth, I've never known a man worth his salt who in the long run, deep down in his heart, didn't appreciate the grind, the discipline. There is something in good men that really yearns for discipline and the harsh reality of head-to-head combat. I don't say these things because I believe in the brute nature of men or that men must be brutalized to be combative. I believe in God and I believe in human decency, but I firmly believe that a man's finest hour, his greatest fulfillment to all he holds dear, is that moment that he has worked his heart out in a good cause and lies exhausted on the field of battle victorious." Isn't that the best quote ever?
That is
and it's
awesome,
exactly what you're talking. Yeah, exactly what you're talking about, Father. You know, Vince Lombardi was a daily mass scorer too. In fact, back then it was the extraordinary form, and he often served the extraordinary form too. But there's something too about that, about, you know, and I have gatherings. You were here once for that back in 2018. But it's men getting together. We expose the Blessed Sacrament and we kneel as knights before our King.
Right.
And it's powerful. It's powerful. And we do this every first Friday evening. But what it's done is it has ignited something in men to say that, you know, it's not about, video games and clicking on porn. Okay. I got to get up and I got to get in the battle and I got to make a difference in this world and I got to lead my family. Right, Father?
That's absolutely correct. I think the other thing is the things that are most arduous of all are particularly the spiritual things.
Exactly.
That interior discipline, maintain, overcoming your defects, crushing your defects, your imperfections and your vices, and building the virtue. That's where the real discipline comes from, and that's where the real arduousness comes from. The sad thing of it is that's where most men shy away from. But the fact of the matter is that it's not just in the physical. Even the physical stuff that's arduous, it's there because it's actually purifying and perfecting the interior virtues and the interior, removing the interior imperfections. And so this is the approach that people actually have to have. But I think that's one of the reasons why, sometimes you'll hear these guys say, "Oh, well, praying is for women." No, it's not. And they always say that ultimately because they're either too lazy or prayer is difficult. Doing those things is sometimes difficult, especially when it's consistent and it's a grind. But anyway, the point being is that, it's the spiritual battle that is the primary battle that makes a man in this, in a certain sense, because
Exactly.
he can deal with, he can fight and do anything on the external level, but if he doesn't have self-mastery internally, he's never going to reach the true sense of masculinity, where he has that true interior discipline.
Oh. Can you hear him?
I can't hear you, Doug. I see.
I
that
can't hear you, Doug.
his microphone
You got your
on.
mute on.
Oh, just a second. How's that? Is that better? Gotcha.
Yeah, you're better now.
That's better.
So what'd you say?
Setting here.
Your
I
mouth
think
was moving, but nothing was coming out.
Well, yeah, that's people say that about me a lot. So, but I think about this, Father Ripperger, when you say this about men, is we see very much the biggest, strongest, toughest men, naturally speaking, at least the athletes and so forth, who look like they got everything together, and yet when it comes to virtue, there's something missing interiorly, it seems like.
Right.
And I know we're all sinners and we all struggle, but there are times, and I think you made some comment in a talk a while back I heard, where you got the big athletes out there, they got all the money, they got all the strength, they got all the looks and everything, but you take their cell phone away from them and they cry like little babies or something like that.
Right. Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. But so then, Father, what can you say to the ladies out there? Because I tell my wife all the time, I know there's I think it's the Greek in Genesis that Eve is Adam's Ezra Kenegdo, I think is the word, battle partner, in other words. I know Deacon Harold Burke Sivers talks about this. Is it? I tell my wife, you're my battle partner, and the whole the submission, that she is kind of underneath the mission of the man. Of course, that mission being a godly, holy mission. And I have a friend. I have a friend who's ex-military, and he says his wife is his little sniper, where she takes the high ground and, spiritually speaking, will pick off the enemies to protect her husband. So anyway, images like that. What can you say to the ladies out there, who, to help them understand how they can help us men recognize and really live out the masculinity that God calls us to be, good, holy, masculine men?
Well, I think the first thing is to avoid the sin of usurpation. That's basically the usurpation is the sin in which one basically takes authority in an area that's not proper to your authority, or that you don't properly have. And so I tell women a lot of times that, that basically trying to take control of the situation in the family or over her husband, trying to always control him or manipulate him and things like that sort. The other thing is that women have a natural law inclination to that submission. And so when they do that, they're miserable themselves. So I just tell them, just submit. And a part of that is also encouraging him to encourage him, you've got to make sure that the children are praying. We got to make sure that we're all praying, that you lead the family prayers, that you actually, are there at mass and you're showing the children and you're encouraging them to go to confession and getting to mass, so that they see that. And so if the wife encourages him, and then the other thing is when he makes a legitimate decision, abide by it, unless it's a grave matter, just leave it alone. Just let it sit. And what will happen is over the course of time, the other thing is just be detached. See, one of the things that happened is in scripture, it actually says, your desire shall be for your husband. And God said that to Eve. In Hebrew, the term desire for has a twofold meaning. It means not only to desire to be with, but it means the desire to control. And so now women have this problem of wanting to control their husbands, which actually was the punishment in relationship to Eve handing him the fruit. But if they can conquer that in themselves, the husband will very often, a man of normal virtue, will naturally start coming up to speed. But if he's getting beat down by his wife, he's going to back off. Whereas if he sees that she's being submissive and wants him to lead and is encouraging the children, etc., then they will do so. There's another thing I can tell women. Look, if you want your children to obey you, then you have to obey your husband, because the minute they see you disobeying your husband, they're going to see in that, whether they're not going to formally think this, but they're going to recognize dad doesn't have to be obeyed, right? And then what's going to happen? Well, then neither does mother have to be obeyed. And so this is one of the reasons why I tell them, obey your husband, and then the children will start that. You'll find that order starting to fall in place in relationship to their to the children and to the whole family. I often tell women this last one too, which is, St. Thomas says that women are in three states. The first state is that women will create in a state of subordination because she's under Adam by the natural law, and and that we know this by virtue of the fact that Adam was her head, that God did not communicate to don't eat from the fruits to Adam and not to Eve, and therefore Adam had to communicate it to Eve as a sign of Adam's authority in relationship to her, etc. But then after the fall, women entered into a state of subjection, and the hallmark of that particular state is that Adam isn't solicited for her, doesn't take care of her. He treats her badly, unlike he did before when she was in a state of subordination. So I tell women, look, just if you subordinate, you'll find that men will naturally start to reclaim that, treating her well. I often tell women, I don't know why you want to control your husband when all you have to do is submit and he'll give you what you want anyway. But the third state, he says, is that in heaven, women are neither in a state of subordination nor subjection. And that's because some women rule in heaven. So I tell women, look, if you want to control and dominate your husband, don't go for the short payout in this life. Submit to your husband, become holier than he is. That way you'll have a higher place in heaven, and then you can boss him around for all eternity.
That's great. That's great. Well, listen, Father, this has been amazing and so helpful. I know so many people are I was leaning into the screen the whole time, but this has just been so amazing for us, and especially for the men. And I wonder if we could close tonight, if you wouldn't mind, if you could offer a blessing for all of us, but for the men in particular, with the intercession of Saint Joseph. Could you do that for us, Father?
Sure. Well, first we'll just say a quick prayer to Saint Joseph, asking him for the intercession. And then I'll give you a blessing.
Nice.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Saint Joseph, we ask you to accompany all those men who desire to seek masculinity, that you who are the exemplar in that regard, along with your Son, Jesus Christ, we ask you to accompany them and to intercede for them so that they may receive the grace, the enlightenment in order to know what to do, in order to pursue, as well as to have the motivation to pursue true masculinity for the sake of them and for their families. Benedictio Deum omnipotentis Patris et Filii et Spiritus super vos et manet semper. Amen.
Amen. God bless you, Father.
Thank you, Father.
Thanks, Doug.
God bless you too.
Yes.